Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be bringing you, I think, my biggest ever wrap up. I don't think in the history of this channel, but also in my entire life, I have read this many books in a month before. I have 27 books to talk to you about. Admittedly, some of them are very short, but I am going to try and get through these as quickly as I can. I did have a lot of time off in December. I finished in my previous job on the 11th of December, and as of you seeing this video, I will have started my new job, but I did have the 11th of December all the way up to New Year off, and I didn't really have anything else to do apart from reading. Some of these books I have spoken about in some recent videos. I did a top 10 reads of the year for my favourite children's and YA books, my favourite non-fiction book, and my favourite fiction for grown-ups, and I will leave all of those videos linked down below in the description if you haven't seen them already. I do have a few Christmas books as well, which I will talk about at the end because, you know, it's January, you don't need to hear too much about Christmas books at this point. So I will begin the wrap-up with the books I haven't spoken about anywhere before, starting with the fiction for grown-ups. So in December, I finally finished A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I have been reading this one since October. This novel spans, I think, about 17 years, and it follows the events of the French Revolution and the events that led up to it, these circumstances which caused this uprising. We see the vast inequality between those that have a lot of wealth and those that don't. We see the mistreatment of people who are revolutionaries. The plot of this novel really kicks off when a young woman named Lucy is told that her father, who she believed to be dead, is actually alive, and he has been imprisoned for many, many years, and she is now able to meet him, and much of the novel follows their relationship and also her father's. He's probably got PTSD, like that's probably what's happening. There's lots of other kind of subplots going on, and I would say there are maybe like 5 or 6 dominant characters in this. Some of them fleshed out better than others are. I would say Lucy's probably one of the worst fleshed out characters. Like, she doesn't really have much of a personality, and I feel like her main personality trait is being pretty. But anyway, I digress. I didn't find this as kind of, I mean, I'm not particularly well versed in Dickens, but compared to what I have read previously, this didn't have as many kind of moments of humour and respite. It is quite bleak. And I think I found it very interesting as like a historical source as opposed to a novel as such, and that's the way that I look at a lot of classics. Like, what can we learn from these stories about how people were reacting to world events? So yeah, I'm really glad that I read this one, even though it took me quite a while. Next I have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is the second Before the Coffee Gets Cold book, and I read the first one last year and thought it was just such a warm book. This is a Japanese novel that is very light on the sci-fi. Like, the sci-fi elements of this book kind of just exist to explore things about human connection and relationship. There's this cafe that enables you to time travel, but there are lots of kind of rules and restrictions about how this time travel can be done. It has to be at like a certain time of day, a certain person has to pour your coffee, you can only meet people who have been in that cafe, you cannot get up from your seat once you have time traveled, and you have to finish your conversation before your coffee gets cold. And that sci-fi setup is just a vehicle to explore very intimate and beautiful moments of human connection. I think this book kind of fleshed out the history of the cafe a lot as well, which I thought was a lot of fun. I highly recommend these books. I think they're really great. I also read Luster by Raven Lalani. This book is fantastic. Like, it's so good. And I know so many people who have had a really profound connection to it and have said that it made them feel seen in a way that no novel ever had before. In this book, we're following a young woman who is kind of struggling with her career. She's the only black girl in her office. She's not in the best financial situation, the best housing situation by any means. No one really seems to care about her, and she's just kind of looking for her next hookup. And then she becomes involved with a much older white man, and then becomes strangely involved with his wife and their kid, and she basically just kind of ends up being on the periphery of their family. That whole dynamic is just very uncomfortable, but you can empathize with her and understand why she's just kind of going with emotions and allowing this to continue. I think it really captures what it's like to be a young person without any direction, and I think it's a remarkably self-aware novel as well. Next I have Ario by Fran Ross. I'm gonna level with you guys, I don't think I was clever enough to understand this book. This is about a young mixed race girl who grows up in Philadelphia. She's raised by her grandparents. Both of her parents are absent. She has a Jewish father and a black mother, and when she's 14 she sets off to New York to try and find her father, and we basically just follow her on that journey, but like, so much stuff happens. It's a real labyrinth of a book. It's really twisty, really turny. I would say it's very postmodern. There's a lot of world play. I would say there's a lot of like uncanny stuff in there. There's a lot of stuff that just doesn't make sense, but you kind of just have to roll with it. It's very satirical. It's very feminist. I feel like this book is brilliant, but it just kind of went over my head. Like, I feel like I was having a good time, just a very confused one. Next I have Heads of the Coloured People by Nafissa Thompson Spires. It is about growing up. It's about negotiating negotiating and renegotiating what your identity is. It exposes the violence that is faced by Black Americans, both internally and externally. It's such a precise collection of stories, and they feel so psychologically intimate. Like, I feel like this author just really fully understands her characters, even though she's spending a relatively short amount of time with them. But something that I did love about this collection is how characters are woven in and out of these stories. So each individual stories does stand on its own 2 feet completely, but there will be characters that appear from other stories, there are characters that are linked, and I think that added just a really fun element to the stories as well. It's masterful storytelling, and I highly recommend it. Next I have The Comet Seekers by Helen Cedric. Unfortunately, I really didn't enjoy this book. I would struggle to tell you what happened, if I'm being honest. I found it quite tedious. In this book, we are mainly focused on 2 characters, an Irish woman and a French man, and they meet in Antarctica when they are looking for a comet. And the novel zooms back through history and kind of explores the history of both of their families. And it kind of looks at how this moment of the meeting was, I guess, always meant to happen. There's like ghostly elements to this book. I didn't really feel anything. Like, I think you're meant to feel like it's an epic love story, and I don't really feel anything. I honestly don't have that much more to say about it other than that, unfortunately. Moving on to the non-fiction now, I have On Connection by Kay Tempest. This is a really brief, short book that explores Kay's ideas around creativity and connection. It's kind of just a musings of what they have learned over 20 years of being both a poet and a performer. I think what they say about how they were able to see their own work in a different way when they performed it on stage was fascinating. How it gave them a more objective view of their work. It really explores what it means when a piece of creativity is put out into the world. It explores how great writing, or to be honest, not great writing, can help connect people. It's a celebration of fantastic writing. It's a celebration of language. It's remarkably self-aware, and I think if you are someone who, to be honest, I think this would be great for all readers to experience, because I think you will get something out of it that relates to your experience of being a reader. But I think especially if you are a writer or a performer or both, then you would get so much out of this, and it will give you a lot of food for thought. Next I have 2 non-fiction books I'm going to talk about very quickly. I have Mermaids and Fairies by Skye Alexander. These are books that essentially just explore the history of these mythological creatures, how they have been depicted in folklore, anthology, art and literature. While there is obviously a lot of research that have gone into these books, they're definitely not academic, or I think particularly the best source material for learning about these creatures, but they are a lot of fun. I think they're really quick, cozy reads. In the Fairies book in particular, there was a lot of focus on Ireland. We have a really rich mythology of the Fae, of fairies. Although I will say there were some things that I didn't think were entirely accurate, which made me quite cautious when reading about the folklore and mythology from other countries and whether that information was accurate. Earlier this year, I read Unicorn's book that's up on my shelf, and they look so beautiful together, so I think now these books are kind of decor for me, but I don't need to feel guilty about that because I've read them now. And I did really enjoy reading them as well. Next I have a book of poetry to talk to you about, and that is Cannibal by Safia Sinclair. This is a book that really explores Black womanhood. It explores what it's like to be brought up in Jamaica. It covers race relations in America, and it really looks at this theme of exile. And it is really when we are looking at race and exile that this collection intersects with William Shakespeare's The Tempest. The Tempest is one of my favourite Shakespeare plays, and I think if you're familiar with that play, particularly if you've seen it on stage, the parallels in this collection and how she has used the Tempest will be really apparent. I think it adds a really interesting layer to thinking about that play, and it really explores this idea of the female body as being a cannibal. I'd really recommend this if you're a fan of contemporary poetry that deals with these kind of themes. Sticking with poetry, but now talking about a collection that is named at young people, I have She is Fierce, which is edited by Anna Sampson. Anna Sampson has collected together 150 poems from women from lots of different backgrounds, from lots of different points in history, some classic poets and some contemporary writers. There's Nikita Gill, there's Ursa Daly Ward, there is Wendy Cope, there's Maya Angelou, there is Holly McNish. Those are just some of the voices included in this collection. There are so many more, and I think this is a really great way to sample a lot of different poets. The collection is broken down into lots of different sections which explore different themes, and I think that's a really fantastic, accessible way for young people to get into poetry. I myself had so much joy in returning to poems that I knew I loved, but equally there were also a lot of writers in here and a lot of particular poems in here that I'd never read before and really enjoyed. I think this is a really empowering collection for young women in particular. I also read Black and British by David Olusoga. This is the children's edition of a previously published book by David Olusoga, which looks at the history of Britain. When the first Africans came to Britain, the legacy and history of Black people in Britain, the role that they played throughout history, how they have been mistreated, and it explores the impacts, the long-lasting impacts of empire. It looks at the role Black people played in the Industrial Revolution, and it looks at the history of slavery in Britain. I learned so much from this book. Like, I know it's aimed at kids, but I learned so much. And it really refocused the narrative on so many people that have been forgotten by mainstream education and history. The maps and photos included in this book were really helpful as well. Reading this book really reminded me of reading the horrible history books when I was a kid, but even better, like so much better. But it gave me that same kind of really enjoying learning vibe, but being really disappointed that this wasn't the type of stuff that I learned in school. I mean, obviously I was educated in Ireland, not in Britain, but you know, we didn't talk about Black people that much either. So yeah, I would really recommend this if you are looking to learn a bit more about this yourself, but also if you have a young person in your life, maybe if you're a teacher, you're a parent. I think this is really fantastically put together. Next I have Bloom by Nicholas Skinner. Not only is this book beautiful on the outside, it was just such a surprise for me. Like, this book was so much fun. In this book we're following a little girl who, she's a bit of a stickler for the rules, like she's a goody two-shoes. Some of the teachers in her school go to her to be reminded of the rules, and their whole school environment is just very strange and not cohesive to productive learning or allowing the children any kind of autonomy or personality. Like, it's not a good school. One day this little girl finds a packet of seeds and everything kind of just snowballs from there. And I don't want to say too much about the plot because it completely, like, I didn't really understand where it was going. It was very strange and I had the best time. This book is just completely marvelous and whimsical and strange. It's the kind of kids book where it's just like, this doesn't make any sense, but it's so much fun. Like, everything that's happening is just so bizarre, but you've just got to go with it. And what I loved about this book in particular was how metafictional it is. I don't think this is a spoiler by any means, but basically towards the end of this book we follow this little girl writing up the story of what has just happened to her, and it's kind of like it comes full circle because you're holding the story. It's kind of like in the same way that you are very aware of Lemony Snicket writing a series of unfortunate events, like you're aware that he's writing it. Does that make any kind of sense? Also, what was slightly weird about reading this book was there are elements of like epidemics and people being in quarantine in this book as well, which I wasn't expecting, but was quite timely. Yeah, I enjoyed this so much. I really recommend it. Very quickly, I'm going to talk about 4 picture books that I've been sent from work. So I have 2 books in the Sue Potato series by Sue Hendra and Paul Linnick. These are really fun children's picture books that are set in a supermarket and follow a group of vegetables and a Sue Potato. He's a superhero potato. Like, really, what more do you need? It's a superhero potato. One of the things I really enjoyed about reading these books as well was the villainous pea character that crops up throughout the spread. And I think it would be really fun for a child to like spot this character as he crops up in the illustrations. I also have The Littlest Yak by Lou Fraser and Kate Hindley. This was so much fun because it is set in the snow. It does feel quite festive as well. This is about a little yak named Gertie who doesn't like being the smallest yak. She really wants to grow up and be like all the big yaks that are around her. She feels like there's a lot of stuff that she's just not able to do because of her size, and she finds herself feeling very insecure and frustrated with this. But soon Gertie comes to realize that there is an advantage in being the littlest yak, and there are some things that only she can do. I really enjoyed the illustrations in this. I thought the rhyming text was so much fun, and I thought the message of the story was really great as well, you know, to find value in yourself, to see the strengths where other people might see weaknesses, and not to be in a rush to grow up. I also read I'm Sticking With You by Smriti Halls and Steve Small. This is beautifully illustrated. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it follows the friendship between a squirrel and a bear. It follows all of the stuff that these two friends get up to, how your friends can help you through the good times and the bad, and that your friends should always be there for you. It is utterly charming. The illustrations, as I said, are gorgeous. Next, I have 4 books to talk to you about that I have spoken about in my recent best books videos. As I said, they will be linked down below in the description, and when I am talking about these books I will link them in the cards as well. So let's stick with the kids books while we're here. I read Greek Myths by Jean Menzies with illustrations by Katie Ponder. I'm sure you're familiar with Jean's YouTube channel. I will leave it linked down below in the description anyway. If you haven't checked it out, you totally should. childhood. This is an illustrated non-fiction book which is all about the key figures and events from Greek mythology. Now, we've really seen a rise in kind of Greek retellings in recent years, and I've read a fair few of those, and there have been some that I've enjoyed more than others, but there have definitely been times throughout reading those books where I've been a little bit unsure of who everyone is and their relationships to one another, the chronology of events in Greek mythology. Like, I've found it all quite a little bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing, and I felt a little bit dim for not knowing. And this book is the perfect antidote to that as a grown-up reader, but I'm sure, of course, children would adore this book too. I definitely remember reading these really fantastically illustrated educational books when I was a child, and reading this book really took me back to that. I got into bed with it one evening, got all cozy, and just devoured it in one sitting, and it was just such a joyful reading experience. I think the way that the text interacts with the illustrations is done really well in this. Something which I really valued was the repetition in this book. So a character will be introduced to you and will be explained who it is, and when they crop up again later, there will be a little very subtly included reminder of who they are. Honestly, cannot recommend this highly enough. It was such a fantastic reading experience and I learned so much from it. Next, I have A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. This, like Greek myths, was included in my top 10 children's books of the year. This is a debut middle grade novel which is all about a little girl named Addie who is autistic, and it's about her kind of going through her school life with people not really understanding what it is like for her as an autistic person, both her fellow students and her teachers just really not understanding that at all. At school, they learn about the witch trials that took place in their town, and Addie realizes that these women weren't guilty of doing anything. They were trialed as witches, suspected of being witches, and punished for this just because they were somehow different from the norm. And Addie feels a real kinship with that. She's a fantastic character to spend time with. I really enjoyed the differing relationships she has with her two older sisters. This is a fantastic story of courage and friendship and what it means to be different. There's also this incredible love of reading that shines through in this book, which I thought was just such a joy. I'm so excited to see what this author does next because I think this book is just fantastic. Some non-fiction now. I have A Dear Reader by Kathy Rensenbrink, which made my top 10 non-fiction books of the year. This is a book that is all about the joys of reading, the significant role that books play in our lives. And we follow Kathy's life book kind of signposted by the fantastic books she was reading at a particular time, from her childhood right the way up to her adulthood. It's quite focused on her career in the book industry as well, which is something that I found really engaging. It really is just a love letter to reading, and it was something that I really profoundly connected with. I have this notebook where I have written down every book that I have read since 2015 and the particular months that I read them in, and every time I look through that list it's like a whistle-stop journey of my life. Like, I really remember particular books that connected with me. I really remember what my state of mind was, what my living conditions were, what I was going through at the time I was reading those particular books. So seeing someone do that for their own life and pick out particular books that were poignant to them at certain points in their life, I just thought was fantastic, and this book is such a comfort and a joy. I really recommend it for readers everywhere. My god, I am starting to lose my voice. Next, I have Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. This was in my top 10 fiction books of the year. In this book, we are following a woman in her 30s navigating her career as a food writer, navigating her family relationships, which have a lot of strain on them because her father is dealing with dementia, and there's a bit of tension between our main character and her mother because they have conflicting ideas about how that should be dealt with. There's a lot of considerations in this book about what it means when the lives of friends go in very different directions and how to maintain those friendships when you're doing very different things with your life. Our main character Nina is very much still living the kind of central London life, but a lot of her friends have started to, you know, move away from London, settle down, have kids. And of course in this book we are also dealing with her dating life, and we follow Nina when she meets this man that she thinks is incredible and she has this amazing time with, but then for no reason this guy just ghosts her. And I mean, girls, we've all been there, huh? I think if that's an experience you've gone through, there will be so much that resonates with you in this book. And I think some people would so quickly dismiss that as it being like, oh, it's just a millennial woman being sad about a boy, but like, I do think it speaks to a lot of crises in like dating culture, in masculinity, in how we communicate, in the role that social media plays, in how we form relationships. Like, I think there's actually so much of real depth that she's touching on here. It's compulsively readable. I had the best time. Don't worry guys, we are in the home stretch. We just have the Christmas books to go now. I'm gonna fly through these 4 festive poetry stories from Carol Ann Duffy. So we have Mrs. Scrooge, which is a bit of a modern take on the classic A Christmas Carol story, and it has a lot to do with like political activism, which I wasn't expecting. We have Wenceslas, which follows a classic Christmas story but told in a really unique way. We follow the Wren Boys, and what I really appreciated about this was its engagement with Irish mythology, its acknowledgement that it's St. Stephen's Day, not Boxing Day. What the fuck is Boxing Day? I think that was done really well. And Another Night Before Christmas, which again is just a twist on the classic Christmas story that we know, but retold with Carol Ann Duffy's really distinctive poetic voice and style. This one was probably my favourite. I think it's the longest of all of them, but I think, yeah, this is probably the one that I enjoyed the most. And I have 2 Christmas romances. So I'm gonna start with The 12 Dates of Christmas. I just had the best time. Like, this book was so much fun. I enjoyed it so much. This was the book that I was reading like on Christmas. I started reading it on Christmas Eve, finished it on Christmas Day. In this book we're following Kate, who lives in a very kind of sleepy English town, very like small town vibe, and her friend convinces her to sign up for this thing which is called the 12 Dates of Christmas. You are matched with 12 different people, you go on 12 different dates in the lead up to Christmas. It's very self-explanatory. And we just follow Kate as she experiences all of these dates that have varying degrees of success or failure. They're very entertaining. And while following these dates is kind of what propels the plot of this novel, we are of course just following Kate's life, her relationship with her best friend, the complicated relationship that she has with her mother, who I found very reminiscent of the mother in Bridget Jones' Diary, her far more positive relationship with her father, which I loved so much. I found that such a beautiful relationship. And we're also following the ups and downs of her friendship with Matt. I just want to say this book ends exactly how you know it's going to end in the first chapter, but I thought that was so fun. I found it really comforting to be able to tell where this story was going, and it was just a matter of watching it figure itself out. I just thought it was so much fun. Like, it's fun. That's all I have to say. And finally, I have All About Us by Tom Ellen. This is another festive romance. This is a proof copy. So in this book, we're following Ben, who is at quite a tense crossroads in his life. He is married to Daphne, but he feels like the magic in their relationship is kind of gone. The spark is gone. They're just getting on each other's nerves. And then one day, an old flame gets in touch. And essentially, what Ben has to do is to decide whether he's gonna have an affair or not. But there is a magical element to this book. Ben meets a very mysterious older gentleman at the pub who gives him this watch. And when Ben goes to sleep, he then wakes up in his university bedroom. He has gone back in time to the night where he first met Daphne, the woman who would go on to be his wife. And we follow him through several moments where he's traveling through time and experiencing different events where he could have chosen something differently. He could have done something differently. And they're all set around the festive period. This book really took me by surprise. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. The rom-coms that I read are very rarely, if ever, told from a male perspective. And I actually found that really interesting and really refreshing. I think Ben is a really interesting character to spend time with. He definitely feels like a real person. I would say the female characters around him don't feel as fleshed out, but that really didn't take away from the book for me in any way, to be honest. This was another one that was just so much fun. I love festive romances. I guess festive romances are maybe one of my favorite genres of books, even though I only read them for like a week-long period every year. But yeah, this was so much fun as well. So there we have it. 27 books! Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. If you don't have anything particular to say, just leave me a little emoji so I know that you're here. I'm gonna go drink some water now because my voice is gone. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video where I will be wrapping up all of my stats for 2020. And you can see how, despite me reading 27 books in December, I still didn't tackle my TBR.